Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Lauren Korn. I'm the host of Montana Public Radio's The Right Question. I'm sitting here with KGLT's Chrysti the Wordsmith, and I know that she's the reason you're all here. Yeah. This is going to be a conversation about words, but it's also going to be a conversation about process, and you guys get to kind of be in the know about our process because some of that is going to be radio. We're hopefully going to turn this conversation into The Right Question episode. So these two mics up here are recording us for hopefully a future broadcast date. That means, though, that you get to hear me ramble maybe a little bit more than you do on air, or slip up if I say the wrong word. And because we might be using this as an episode, I might want to re-say it. So I'll slip up and then I'll give myself a pause and I'll just re-say it. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds like radio to me.
That sounds like radio. So this isn't live radio, but it is going to be radio, and this conversation is, as you are all here, it is a live conversation. We're real people sitting up here. So,
and not gorgeous imposters, we want you to know.
Someday. Someday. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here. I'm going to introduce Chrysti, known to many as Chrysti the Wordsmith. This is Chrysti Smith. Who here knew that Chrysti the Wordsmith's name was Chrysti Smith? That's not everyone. So there are people in this room who are surprised right now. What a wonderful title for a series.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
When I came up with it, I thought it was just so deviously clever. 33 years ago.
It is. It is. Yeah. I learned, not last night, but in the recent, not so distant past that was your real name. I thought it was incredible. So anyway, Chrysti the Wordsmith, everyone. We are here to talk about what is her interstitial radio program of the same name, Chrysti the Wordsmith, and it's been going for over 30 years. Can you believe that? Yeah, it started in 1990. Chrysti has been producing these 2-minute episodes about words and their origins. And the series is now heard on KGLT, where it's produced. It's heard on Montana Public Radio, obviously, Yellowstone Public Radio in Billings, KCPR in Salt Lake City, worldwide on Armed Forces Radio and Television Network. So people all over the world are hearing Chrysti's words on words. Chrysti the Wordsmith was born and raised in Poplar, Montana, and I'm going to ask her about that. Oh, we have arms up in the air. Poplar, Montana fan back there. Oh. On the state's celebrated High Line, and she now lives in Belgrade. I'm going to see, there it goes. She now lives in Belgrade, Montana. And I'm gonna end that, but I'm gonna say, Chrysti, welcome to The Right Question.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks everybody for coming out today. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, one more round of applause. Yeah.
It's wonderful to see radio listeners live and in person, and I'm sure that you're looking at me live and in person and going, "Oh, that's what Chrysti the Wordsmith looks like." Goes both ways.
You're beautiful, and you're beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So are you.
Before I start asking the right questions, I just want to thank the Montana Book Festival for hosting us, the Missoula Public Library for literally hosting us here in their space, and because this conversation just might become a future episode of The Right Question, I also want to thank Humanities Montana, the Greater Montana Foundation, and MTPR listeners, all of you who are listening to Montana Public Radio. Thank you so much for listening and for being here tonight. So, Chrysti, my first question was actually not going to be this one, but then I read your bio on your website, and I learned that you grew up on the High Line.
That's right.
I became pretty curious about your childhood. What were you like as a child? Were you a little wordsmith?
I was not a little wordsmith. I was more of a horse gal. I was impassioned by horses
You were
from
a horse
early
girl.
on. Yes, I had many horses growing up, been bucked off many times. And when I got my driver's license, I begged my dad for a motorcycle, and so I rode horses and motorcycles throughout my young life. Not a wordsmith at that time.
Not a wordsmith.
No.
You guys weren't here for this pre-conversation jaunt, but Chrysti and I went downstairs into the reference materials in the library, and I probably will be referencing that jaunt throughout this conversation because it was a joy. But now I know that you are a horse girl. I understand your enthusiasm for the Encyclopedia of Horses that we found down there.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Well, then, where did your curiosity about language, about words, come from, if not from early in your childhood?
I was curious about words as a youth, but really no more than anybody else was, I don't think. My mother and grandmother were both school teachers. My dad was a farmer, and he loved words. He was kind of an inspiration for me. He was the original wordsmith, I think. We read dictionaries together. We explored words together, and he was a great mimic and dialectician. He liked to imitate people's dialects that he heard, and he was very good at it. He liked to make up words too, especially onomatopoeias. He was an onomatopoeia smith.
That's a skill.
That is a skill.
Writers need that skill.
Right,
You know,
that's right.
we want to read a word and we want to hear it in our heads, right?
Right, that's right.
Amazing. Well, if you didn't want to be a wordsmith when you grew up, but you loved horses, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a rancher.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
well then what drew you away from ranch life?
Well, the impracticability of being a rancher. It's just impracticability of being a rancher. I didn't have enough money, actually, to invest in cattle and horses and a place.
You're making the big bucks now?
Oh, I am now.
Yeah. Yeah, the writing life, the wordsmithing life. It's a good one. Okay, so you started Chrysti the Wordsmith, this radio series in 1990.
Right.
Why did you start it? What were your reasons behind it? Why did it happen? What kind of guide us through that thought process?
All right.
Yeah.
So at age 30, I decided I was ready to start college. I was a late bloomer. And as a student over traditional age, or SOTA, is what they call them at MSU, I enrolled in the field of anthropology and archaeology. I was originally going in to become an archaeologist. What was that?
Archaeologist in the room?
Yeah.
Hi.
I wanted to be you. But on the way, I got seduced by an odd combination of dictionaries and linguistics and radio. Part of the anthropological study is that of linguistics, which is the study of language and languages. Why there are so many languages in the world, for example. It tries to answer the question of which of our hominid ancestors may have been the first to produce language and speech, and on and on and on. There are lots and lots of questions that we don't know about language and speech in the human species. And this information just knocked me out. I'd never been exposed to it as a younger person, and I thought, why haven't I learned anything heretofore about linguistics, about languages? I just fell headlong in love with it. And I thought, you know, we all of us need to know a little bit about linguistics because we all use language. And we all should know why we use the language we do, how our vocal mechanism, how our vocal tract produces speech. It's just the most fascinating thing. And I thought, you know, I want everyone to know about this, and what's the best way to do it? Maybe I could start a radio series about it. And fortunately for me, Montana State University has a learning radio station, KGLT, which is open to all of its students and community members as well. And so after sitting on this idea for a long time about a radio series about linguistics and words and dictionaries, finally girded my loins and went up to the general manager, and I asked him if he'd be interested in me producing a series about that very same thing. And he looked at me, and he looked at me, and he squinted at me, and he said, "Sure." And that was that. It was a serendipitous moment. And I was in the studio 2 weeks later with some radio scripts and the first of what would be thousands of Wordsmith scripts later, you know, in the future.
We talked on the phone a couple of days ago, and you said that when you first started the program, the length of each episode wasn't standardized. Right now, it's 2 minutes long. I'm sure you all know that. But in the beginning, it wasn't.
Right.
Why did you choose 2 minutes? What about 2 minutes made that the perfect amount of time for you and what you're doing?
I think my producer and I at the time decided 2 minutes was probably about enough. My first radio scripts were anywhere from 1 minute and 20 seconds to 3 minutes and a half, and it was not standardized at all. And so when we started thinking about sending this series off to public radio stations, then it had to become standardized as an interstitial. It needs to fit in.
Interstitial, right. What was the pull towards radio? I don't know about our audience here, but that certainly isn't, when I have an idea or I have an interest, maybe apart from the right question, but when I have an interest, my first thought isn't, I want to create a radio show about it. So what was that interest?
Radio has always been my favorite medium. Growing up on the High Line, when I grew up in the 60s, we had one television station, and that came out of Williston, North Dakota. So it really wasn't relevant to us. We watched it, but it didn't seem quite appropriate, applicable to our lives. And so my household was not a television watching household. We had the radio on all the time. There were radio stations everywhere, including a lot from Canada. And I listened to a lot of Canadian radio, some of which were broadcast in French, and that really fascinated me too. And radio was just a constant source of companionship for me and my peers when we were growing up, and television just wasn't it for me. And so when I first thought of a medium to talk about linguistics, my mind first went to radio.
Does Poplar, Montana, can they receive Chrysti the Wordsmith? Do they get?
No, they cannot.
It's the one place in the world.
In the world. On the High Line, actually. That corner of the state, the northeast corner of the state, does not get public radio.
Yeah. We'll have to do something about that.
Yeah.
Michael Marsalic,
yeah.
Where are you?
Let's talk to some people.
Yeah, we have some connections. A lot goes on in producing a radio show, whether it's 2 minutes like yours or mine is 29 minutes, so you can imagine the difference in the production of that. But I wanted our audience, our listeners, our eventual listeners, our listeners now, to know what that process is like. Because I'm gesturing towards our audience here, you hear 2 minutes, and it's a perfect and it's a nicely bundled 2 minutes about a single word or a phrase or a series of phrases. But I hope, because I certainly don't experience this in the production of my show, that it's not perfect on the back end. So will you walk through what goes into producing Chrysti the Wordsmith?
Well, first of all, I have to choose a word or an expression that I think will be interesting to a listener aged 5 to infinity. So that is the first process that goes through my mind.
I'm gonna stop you, because when we were talking about, because we're gonna talk about some words, of course, we're gonna talk about process and we're gonna talk about words, but you said something in our phone conversation and you're just like, oh, I'm not too interested in this one or that one, right? So what makes an interesting word?
What makes an interesting word? Well, they're all interesting in their own way, but they're not all interesting to me, I guess. If I have a personal connection with the type of word, like animal words always interest me. Bird words, animal words, horse words, dog words, cat words, always. And expressions that deal with animals in our world. That's really very interesting to me. Words that come from poetry or come from plays or from Shakespeare, words or expressions that have come from our English-speaking past, from the 1500s, for example. It's like, that's amazing. They've lived this long, and we still use them in the 21st century. Those always fascinate me. So those are two examples.
Yeah. Okay. So you find a word or a phrase that interests you. Then what? Then
I have to decide how to approach that word, how to construct the first 2 sentences of my manuscript? How am I going to direct that? And that's the hardest part of the process, is staring at the blank screen. When I have all of this information, I've done all the research pretty much. At that point, then I have to figure out what my first 2 sentences are, how those sentences will introduce the topic, how they'll grab the listener, what kind of trajectory, what kind of flavor they'll give.
You sort of just skipped over a huge part of your process, the research.
Oh, the research, yeah.
So you are interested in a word or a phrase, and then you have to research it.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so what does that process look like for you?
The research generally begins with a look into the online Oxford English Dictionary, which I often mention in my radio show. That's the sharpest tool in my kit. And the Oxford English Dictionary, there is one in this library, by the way, the hard copy, which is 20 volumes of 4-inch thick dictionaries. So go to the, well, sorry, this is a diversion, but go to the reference section and take a look at that sometime when you're in the library. So now, fortunately, all that information has been transferred digitally, and I can look any information up, and the Oxford English Dictionary rarely disappoints me. It gives me the chronology of a word. It gives me the word or the phrase used in a sentence. It's an amazing piece of research to use. So that's where I go first, see what I can find there. Then if it's a specialized word, say a word from the American West, then I dial into my own personal dictionaries that I've collected over the years.
I asked you this when we were down in the reference section on the 3rd floor. What does your library look like? What is my question? I want to know what differentiates a book that you buy, you want to add to your library. This book is amazing. An encyclopedia on green, for instance.
Right.
We have a bunch of books back here that we're going to talk about too. Yeah, what differentiates a book that you want to have on hand at all times to a book, say, that you're just going to go and check out from the library, or you're going to go to the library to look up, or you're going to use the internet to find that information?
Right.
What's your thought process there?
Well, I often find when I go to any bookstore, any library, of course, I head straight for the reference section. And there are so many quirky dictionaries out there now. The quirkier the better for me, because I've been collecting them for 35 years or so. So, for example, a dictionary I brought with me is called Drunk. The words associated with inebriation. And I'll show it to you in a minute. It's about that thick. That was one I had to buy. I could not believe that somebody put a dictionary together with words describing intoxication and inebriation.
And that was recently aired, at least on Montana Public Radio. So
Right.
maybe many of you out there actually know some of the words that she talked about during that series. Yeah.
And the dictionary does exist. Incredible.
Okay, so you find. Well, here's a question: when do you stop researching? Because I feel like there are probably so many different resources that you could
Right.
go to
Right.
on any given word or series of words or phrases. When do
Yeah.
you stop researching?
The research could go on and on.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does for days, literally.
Yeah.
It depends on how interested I am in the topic. If I have just a passing interest, I will gather as much information as I need to write a 223-word script, and that's that. But if I have an absorbing interest in the topic, then sometimes it'll take me 3 days to write a 2-minute script. And it's all joy, it's all delight, because I love it so much.
I'm looking at one of your scripts here on the table, and there's the number 222 at the
Yeah.
bottom. That is the number of words
That's the
in that
number of
script.
words.
That's a 2-minute episode.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I should probably do that for the right question. I probably wouldn't ramble so much. Okay, where do we want to go from here? Okay, you're writing the script. How do you narrow down what you actually talk about? Is it again just narrowing it to your taste, to your interest? And
That's the hardest part. That's because each script has to be 222 words, give or take 2 or 3 words. Every single word has to make sense, and it has to carry its own weight. So sometimes I will rewrite one sentence over and over and over again and narrow it down and edit it until it's the right length. And of course, I have to get rid of adjectives and those words that we love to use so much, the adjectives, and I throw them away, and I'm like, oh, that was a beautiful adjective, but I have to get rid of it. That's the way it is. I guess when I know it's finished, well, I do a lot of reading to myself in my study, read over and over and over again, and when it starts to sound right, then I know I can quit editing. But it does have to, the sentences have to have a certain cadence to them, according to my ear. They have to be long enough. Sometimes I have to shorten them to like 2 or 3 words. Every script is different.
Yeah. And then you head into the KGLT studio.
Right.
What does that look like?
I gather a dozen radio scripts, and twice a month, more or less, I will head into the studio where my brilliant editor and engineer, Brody Cates, awaits me. We've been working together for 20 years, and we have that kind of relationship that I can go in, read my 12 radio scripts, and I'm out in 45 minutes.
I'm a little envious of that.
Yeah. Well, you have something else. You have another animal altogether.
It is another animal.
Yeah.
So from point of interest, oh, this word is fascinating. I'm going to produce a series or an episode on it, to end of it, till air, I guess. We'll go all the way to the end. How much time are you spending on each episode?
Probably the least amount of time I spend is 45 minutes, and that's fast. The most amount of time I've ever spent on a word is 5 days. 5 days.
5 days?
Yeah.
That's not too bad,
So
actually.
somewhere in between there, 45 minutes and 5 days.
Oh, yeah, good question.
Oh, okay, I'll tell you, because it's one of my favorites. It's the word bigwig. Bigwig. And we all know what that word means. It's a slang moniker for somebody who's important, wealthy, powerful. That word comes from a fascinating tradition in British history where men and women, everybody wore wigs. And wig makers were important members of every community. Wigs were large, they were expensive. Guilds arose over the 150 years of wig making. The talent was passed down from father to son. And I just got lost in that research about wig history. So actually, if I hadn't done that, I could have finished writing that script in about an hour. It's not that difficult, but the history itself just fascinated me. And I really wanted to write a whole series of wordsmiths about wig making history, but that's not my mission, so I couldn't do it.
My mic ran out of batteries. I can scream.
You want?
Have more batteries or another mic? Sell you it in here.
We'll share.
Oh, we can share. Yeah. That's a good point. So I did a little research into you for this conversation, Chrysti, which, it's no, reference library. It was a Google search. And I found a YouTube video online of a short presentation you gave for the Northern Plains Research Council. Resource Council, thank you. You spoke about the roots of the word grassroots, and this is sort of just preface to my question. But in this video, you said that the more we know about the words and the phrases we use to describe ourselves, the more empowered and confident and joyful we feel when we describe ourselves. So, Chrysti, I want to know what words you are about to, but you would use to describe yourself. And maybe tell us why they're fitting to you.
Words that describe myself. Oh my gosh, that's tough. Impassioned by words, fairly joyful, because I have found my vocation, and the word vocation means a calling, and I really believe that the Wordsmith is a calling for me. So that makes me deeply, profoundly satisfied. I'm satisfied, too. So how about those three?
Those are great.
Yeah.
Those are great.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to go back to our jaunt down into the reference section because it was so short. We were down there for what, 15 minutes or less, and the joy that Chrysti was exuding as we were just looking at these shelves of dictionaries and encyclopedias. And you said animals bring you joy, words bring you joy. Now I'm just looking at this script. So I want to bring up a couple of words that our listeners called in with. MTPR asked listeners to call in with words that they were interested in knowing more about. And the word that I'm seeing right here is actually a word that came from someone in the MTPR family, Sam Mono. He's the host of Children's Corner on Montana Public Radio. He's also one of the hosts and producer of Pea Green Boat, so that might be familiar to a lot of you as well. His word, he's a goat farmer. His word was goat. And so I asked Chrysti what she could tell you and me about the word goat.
Okay, so first of all, you brought up the acronym GOAT, G-O-A-T. How many people have heard that before? GOAT, of course, is an acronym, and it stands for the greatest of all time. And goat in that way has absolutely no linguistic connection to goat, the animal. So I think what I'll do is just read you this one radio script as if I were in the radio studio, and it's one of a series of 3 GOAT terms. And then we'll get into the GOAT acronym.
I cannot wait.
All right, hold on.
Okay, buckle up.
All right. Greetings, word lovers, and welcome to Chrysti the Wordsmith from Montana State University in Bozeman. Somewhere around 300 breeds of goat live on our planet. With the exception of Antarctica, both wild and domestic species exist on every continent. While some are native to their current habitats, others have been introduced by humans. Goat domestication began some 11,000 years ago in the Euphrates River region of Turkey. Since then, goats have been kept for their meat, milk, wool, and hides. The creature has been a significant player in the development of our own species. The goat has inhabited our linguistic lineage for millennia. If we chase the word goat far enough back in time, we find that its earliest antecedent lies in an ancient Indo-European term that's several thousand years old. In more recent centuries, it's the goat's playfulness, agility, and perceived lasciviousness that's been linguistically commemorated in English. For example, calling a man an old goat implies he's a lecher who amorously pursues females like a rutting billy. In an 1857 novel, Texas humorist Samuel A. Hammett has a character say, "I see the old goat a-hugging and a-kissing her when he thought no one wasn't a-looking at him." On the other hand, the young goat, the kid, provides a name for the youthful among us who caper and chase about. Next time on this series, more goat words. I'm Chrysti the Wordsmith. So it goes on to talk about, let's see, goat romance, goat roper.
I think you chose the wrong one to read,
Maybe
Chrysti.
maybe so.
Goat romance. That was a little surreal, right? Hearing her read a script live when I'm sure all of us have been like driving around and just hearing her at 12:57. Yeah, that was amazing. So fun.
Thank you.
Okay, so one script. You gave us one script of goat.
Right.
What can you tell me about the acronym, apart from it being applied to recently retired Serena Williams?
Yes, well, it was applied to other people as well. Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah.
He called himself the greatest of all. I think that's what it was. The greatest, just the greatest. And then that somehow got elongated into the greatest of all time. and that was in the 60s. And that phrase was repeated over and over again until it became much easier to shorten it up to G-O-A-T, goat. And so it really wasn't until the 1990s that the word started to appear in dictionaries as an acronym with capitalized with periods, G-O-A-T.
Yeah, for me, and I'm only speaking for myself, it's only been recently that I've started hearing goat, like
Right.
maybe in the last 5 years or something. I
Right.
feel like it's really come up in everyday
Prominence,
slang.
right.
And yeah, and I mean, did we grab the slang?
No, we did not.
We were down on our jaunt. We saw a slang dictionary, and I thought, hey, wouldn't that be amazing if this dictionary that we grabbed off the shelf just willy-nilly had goat in it? And it didn't. It was published in 2015.
2015.
Did you find a date when you were researching Greatest of All Time that it began to be used more prominently?
Well, it says in the 1990s and into 2000. Let's see. Here's something that I found online. A name of an online sneaker marketplace also took goat as its name in 2015, presumably in reference to its sick kicks, it says.
I'm seeing LL Cool J on your notes. What's
Cool
that
J.
about LL Cool J?
He called himself, he had an album named GOAT, the greatest of all time, LL Cool J. And there is one other. Oh, yes, Serena Williams. It says the popular acronym lends itself well to modification, like when Serena Williams' husband took out a billboard calling her GMOAT for greatest mother of all time when she played her first tournament after giving birth. So how would
That's
we
sweet.
pronounce that, do you think? GMOAT.
We just say moat. The G is silent.
Demote. How about demote?
Just moat.
Silent G.
I'm going to bring in your books into this conversation, Chrysti, because you published 2 books that are now out of print, but they are beautiful. Verbivore's Feast, A Banquet of Word and Phrase Origins. Beautiful. And then a second course, a second edition. And I want to bring it them into the conversation while we're talking about goat, because you actually, I have them here. You actually did talk or write about goats, sort of, in some context here.
Yes.
Yeah, get one's goat.
Yeah. You want to read that one? Should we go with the goat?
I think you should. I think you should go with the goat.
All right. Have you ever been so annoyed that you could say with relative confidence that someone got your goat? We've been using this idiom to express annoyance or irritation for at least a century and probably longer. What's the story behind this inscrutable phrase? Unfortunately, the origin of get one's goat is fugitive. Although one of the first literary citations of the expression appeared in a 1912 Jack London novel called Smoke Ballou, the source of the cliché remains elusive. American editor and critic H.L. Mencken offered a somewhat fanciful theory in 1945, speculating that the expression derives from the horse racing industry. Goats, said Mencken, were often stabled beside high-strung thoroughbreds to calm them between races. A goat stolen, or gotten, from a paddock by the owners of a rival racehorse would be missed by its equine stablemate. The scheme was to upset the horse enough to cause him to falter in the next race.
Thank you.
Yes. And that's an interesting little bit about this particular expression, because I wasn't able to find any authoritative source that says this is where this expression comes from. So I run across that from time to time, and that's always, it's a bit frustrating because you want that satisfaction sandwich of knowing you want the quotations, you want the proper chronology, and sometimes it just doesn't appear. And so all I can do is say, well, it's inconclusive, that's it, which is information in itself, just not satisfying.
Yeah, and there's like some history of it.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah, there's
you see it
no
in
reference
quotations,
point.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for all of you. I'm just like staring at her scripts here. You read on this one. Will you read that word aloud, and then do you know anything about this word?
Lasciviousness.
Yeah.
Well, it means somebody who is a bit sexually aggressive, annoyingly so. Lascivious, a lascivious person.
In your everyday life, Chrysti, do people just constantly ask you what words mean?
Not all that often.
Well, it's probably the good thing that I'm just like not in your everyday life, because I would just probably use you as a dictionary.
That does happen sometimes.
Does it?
It does, yeah. I get phone calls from friends. Hi, Chrysti. We're at a party and we're just thinking about blah, 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 blah. They're having fun and I'm home writing and they want me to look up a word for them.
We know where the drunk series came from then.
That's right.
Okay, so I went through Chrysti's 2 books, and I found a couple of words that sort of related to this year's Montana Book Festival. And I mean sort of, they 100% did. They are in reference to a couple of our authors here. So the first that I would love to talk about with you, Chrysti, Gwen Florio. Is Gwen here tonight? I saw her earlier. No? So Gwen Florio, she's a staple here at the Montana Book Festival for many years now. And she's an author who's been featured many times on The Right Question as well. But Gwen is the author of a mystery series. And there's a protagonist in this series, Nora Best. The first book in that series was Best Laid Plans. And Chrysti wrote about Best Laid Plans in Verbivore's Feast. So I was hoping we could actually get to the root
I think I have it
of that book. Oh, you've got your books there too, yeah.
Yes, I do. I do. Earlier, I said I'm very interested in phrases and words that come to us from poetry, and there's a lot of them, and I am so in love with those particular expressions. This one is a great example, the best laid plans of mice and men. When our most carefully fashioned strategies are ruined by unforeseen events, a familiar response is to repeat this philosophical cliche, well, the best laid plans of mice and men. This expression of resignation is another common saying extracted from the canon of English poetry. Scots bard Robert Burns penned the verses that inspired this phrase in the late 1700s. Burns, sometimes called the plowman poet, was born to a farm family in 1759. With an early talent for writing, Robert began composing verses celebrating Scottish country life and romance while he was still a teenager. One windy autumn day, while he and his brother were plowing a piece of land, Robert spied a field mouse scurrying from a freshly turned furrow. The small incident inspired him to compose "To a Mouse on Turning Up Her Nest with the Plow." In the poem, Burns apologizes to the mouse for disturbing her home, forcing her to build another in the face of the coming wind and frost of winter. But, he adds philosophically, mice are not alone in experiencing such tragedies and frustrated plans because, as he writes, the best laid schemes o' mice and men gong oft agley. Though in popular speech, the famous line has been altered to, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, the meaning remains true to Burns's original sentiments. I love that expression.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good one.
How many of you knew the origin of that expression before? Oh, yeah. All right, good. Good for you.
Audience of wordsmiths. Chrysti, I'm eyeing something else that's on our table. It's
Yes.
a blue spiral notebook. Tell our audience what that's about.
I keep a word journal. Every time I get a suggestion from any of you via a text or email or in person or over the phone, I put that suggestion in this book right here. This is my word journal. It's made from a recycled poetry book from the 1940s, and it has a Pegasus on the front. So this is full, I mean, full of notes and dates, and oftentimes the names of the people who have made word suggestions to me.
That's incredible that it's lasting so long. Are you good? I'm not worried for you. I'm both excited and apprehensive of the point at which you fill that up and you have to find a new one.
I know it's going to be traumatic to get rid of my Pegasus. Yeah, but I've kept a word journal for these 30-some years, and I've probably got 10 of them now filled up.
Those are going to be like artifacts
Yeah.
for someone someday. Who here reads from the dictionary? Okay, we've got like a fair number of hands. I don't know that if I've ever just picked up a dictionary and said this is going to be my recreational reading for the day.
Right.
Tell me about that experience. Don't tell me about reading the dictionary, but why was that something that was so exciting to you as a child, you said, but obviously you still do it now.
Right, I still do it now.
Yeah, a lot.
And there have been times in my young life, or my 20s, when I would read dictionaries exclusively. And I remember particularly sitting in my apartment. I lived in North Carolina for a brief time, sitting in my apartment with a bag of chocolate chips right here on my right and the dictionary on my left. And I would pass hours away eating chocolate and reading dictionaries.
That sounds both amazing and baffling to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be someone who reads the dictionary. I don't think I have the focus to do that.
Well,
there's no plot in a dictionary.
There's no plot. But there are some great stories that can be gleaned.
So
right?
true. Very true. Very, very true. Well, we were just talking about your notebook in which a lot of people were giving you suggestions. That's where you write down things. I wanted to point to a couple of other suggestions. One that you thought was really interesting, a listener called in wondering about the difference between the word data and the word data. Are they the same words? Where do those pronunciations come from? What did you find out?
Well, first of all, I want you to think to yourself which pronunciation you prefer. Is it data or is it data? And I would love...
I feel like this is dying too.
Really? Okay. And I wish we had time to poll all of you because I would love to hear your responses, why you use one pronunciation over the other. I found in a real brief investigation into the term that the pronunciation data is preferred by British English speakers and data is often preferred by American English speakers. And why that is, nobody knows. I prefer the pronunciation data because one of my favorite characters, Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek, The Next Generation, said it so beautifully that way. He referred to his commander data? Is that who it was? Yes. Commander data, he said. From that moment on, we've been silenced.
These are actually just they're recording. They're not projecting.
And that will have to be edited out. We can project.
Yeah, we can project.
Yeah. So, Jean-Luc Picard was the character that inspired me to use the pronunciation data. And I always pronounce that T very crisply, not like a D as in data or data. Data. Always say data. So, it really got me to think of why I pronounce the word the way I do.
And that's the reason. Data. I think I say data.
Data?
I just said data.
Database. Is it database? Is it database? I see it.
Say it out loud. Should we just at the count of 3, everyone say it the way they say that word out loud?
Who says data? Who says data?
Another author who is participating in this year's festival is Marina Ritchie, and she just published her first book, Halcyon Journey, In Search of the Belted Kingfisher. Everyone should read it. It's an amazing memoir. But it brings into its reference the phrase halcyon days. And so that was another term that I found in one of Chrysti's books. So why don't we turn to that?
How many of you have heard the expression halcyon days? Oh yeah, most of you. I was beginning to think it was becoming obsolete. I never hear it anymore, and I rarely use it, but if I run across it in print, I know exactly what it means.
It is right here. Stage 1. Yes, or 1.
So here's the story behind the expression halcyon days. The Greek goddess Alcyone and her mortal husband Ceyx were so in love they made the gods jealous. Zeus and Hera spitefully conjured a strong wind to capsize the ship in which Ceyx was journeying. When Alcyone learned that the sea had claimed her husband, she threw herself into the waters to join her murdered lover. In a spirit of clemency, the gods transformed Alcyone and Ceyx into birds, called halcyons by the Greeks. Halcyons are known to English speakers as kingfishers. The halcyon couple tried to build their nest on the seashore, but the incoming waves continually destroyed it. Again, moved by pity, the gods commanded the waters be still, while Alcyone and Ceyx constructed their nest and incubated their eggs. Each year, as the halcyons raised their young, the sea remained tranquil. This annual brooding season was said to have occurred during the days of the winter solstice. Believing this period of serenity was divinely appointed, the Greeks called it halcyon days. This expression survives in the English language. Halcyon days alludes to any era of peace, prosperity, and happiness.
I like thinking about words surviving. Good.
So when you go to buy that copy of Halcyon Journey, you'll know the story behind the term halcyon days.
We are edging up on an hour. It is 10 to 6, and I want to leave a little time for us to talk about these books that are behind us. Yes. But I think that I want to know what your questions are. Does anyone out there have a question for Chrysti about words, her process, about radio?
Yes.
Yeah, Rob.
I've actually been wanting to pitch this to you for a long while.
Okay, I got my journal handy. Go ahead.
Somewhere, but there are words that become unwords. Ruth.
Oh, yes.
Like you're ruthless.
Right.
But you never say anybody
Has Ruth? Yes.
You're nonplussed, but you're not plussed.
Right.
You people are killed.
Right.
Overwhelmed, underwhelmed, whelmed?
Yeah. Whelmed. That doesn't exist, really.
And I wonder how the original falls out, but the opposite hangs on.
Right.
What happened to Ruth?
Yeah, what happened to Ruth? Ruth is a beautiful name. It means compassion or pity or something like that. But we never use that as a noun, right? Never anymore. But we use the term ruthless all the time. And I did a little word study on some of those terms a while back, and they're called lost positives. Lost positives. And Ruth and ruthless is an example. Kempt and unkempt is another example. Kempt means to be put together. Unkempt is to be shoddily attired, hair messy. But we don't call anyone kempt anymore, really. So there's a whole list, and I can't think of them all right now, but it is a study, a linguistic study about lost positives is what it's called. And I think I might even have, I can't remember where it is, but I think I have a Wordsmith study in one of these books called Lost Positives. But I won't take the time to look them up right now.
Do you remember the first word that you recorded, or I think some years ago?
Oh, yes. The first word that I recorded some 30 years ago, yes, I do. It was the word crapulent. Has anyone heard that term before? I think in while I was perusing the dictionary, I came across that word, and of course, containing that little word crap, I went, what does this mean? Crapulent means to be sick from overindulgence in alcohol. In other words, to have a hangover. When you're crapulent, you just feel terrible. You're sick the next day. Yes?
You spoke about how knowing the words that we use to describe ourselves can make us feel about ourselves. How would you apply that to a macro level in terms of how societies view themselves themselves with the words that they use?
Boy, that is a study. That is quite the study. That would require a whole lot of research into the terms that say, let's just say, for example, British English speakers describe themselves. Scottish English speakers describe themselves. German speakers. I think that's a really interesting premise. I love that on a macro level. Boy. Okay, it's going to go in my word journal. Thank you for the idea. Yes.
Just curious, given that language is as colorful as the human experience is, how often do you kind of have to censor the things that you find out and you're like, oh, I just can't read
Yeah.
that there?
Well, yeah, there's the question is as how colorful the language is, how often I have to censor what I put on the air, and it's just a matter of good taste. There are certain words that you can't say on the radio.
Do you have a collection of words that you have enjoyed, that you've researched, but they just have not made it to air for maybe that very reason?
No, if they don't make it to air, usually I give up on them. It just doesn't produce anything that is that interesting to me. And if it's a censored word, I just don't even start.
You should start collecting them, and then it'll be your third book called like Leftovers or Scraps or something.
I had a speaker series at Pine Creek over Pine Creek. Showing
That's
my Montana
interesting.
roots.
There you go.
Pine Creek, south of Livingston, and it was called Blue Word Wednesday. And the owners of the restaurant enabled me to come and use all the words I wanted to use that I can't use on the radio. And it was a fun night, I'm telling you. It was raucous. It was so raucous. People were yelling stuff from the audience. It really, usually I'm so dignified. And it was fun. The F word, the S word, and their histories. I mean, they all have histories, right? And they're all interesting. So I got to do that once. Yes.
But that reminds me, how much traveling do you do with your Wordsmith work?
I used to do a lot of traveling when I was with the Montana Committee for the Humanities Speakers Bureau. That was some years ago. I signed on for, I think, 8 years, and I was able to travel our delicious state from corner to corner and stem to stern and give presentations about words on various topics, and it was wonderful. And then I haven't been doing so much since COVID, of course. But there was in my halcyon days, I did a lot of travel. Should we get to the dictionary?
Yeah, let's talk about the books that we've got behind us.
If you have other questions, you can ask later or come up afterwards, if you like. I usually travel with many of my favorite dictionaries, so I can kind of have a dictionary petting zoo. You can come up and look at them afterwards. Speaking of naughty terms and censored words, here's a great one. It's called Wicked Words, a treasury of curses, insults, put-downs, and other formerly unprintable terms from Anglo-Saxon times to the present. And it is a scholarly study about all the words that you might think are in here.
I feel like recently, and I'm sorry that I don't know the exact reference, but there was a show that kind of did the same thing. It was like a mini series maybe of people talking about the origins of like bad words.
A worthy topic, I say.
Yeah. You didn't quite, well, maybe you did. I was going to say you didn't quite answer my question about like what delineates like the books that you want to keep, right? Like the books that you have purchased and you have by your bedside table, and the books that you just are like, oh, I don't need that one.
I have to assess them for their practicality and how they'll help me, further my radio series.
You're not a book hoarder then.
No, I tend not to be. I live in a small house and I just don't have room for many books. So I really have to watch it. I have to be very careful. If I look through a dictionary and I go, oh, this is useful for my research, I will buy it. If it's not, it stays on the shelf. So, American Heritage Dictionary of Idioms. This is another go-to dictionary. wonderful. It's one of those kinds of dictionaries you open up, you start reading, you turn the page, you read some more. It's like eating potato chips. You can't eat just one. It just keeps on going.
Has there ever been an instance that you learned what a word, like the history of a word, the origin of a word, and that made you not want to use that word anymore? Or alternatively, you can answer either of these questions. Did you, in your research, have you found that you've been using words incorrectly?
Yes, sometimes, yep.
Yeah.
Or not quite right. You know, I needed to tweak my understanding of the word and use it properly, in which case sometimes I'll just drop the word from my vocabulary altogether because I realize that I'm not using it properly, and until I school myself, then I'll pick it up again.
Can you think of an example of that?
I can't.
No,
I
that's
cannot.
okay. That's okay.
Good question, though.
On to the petting zoo. Yeah.
Yeah. Arcade Dictionary of Word Origins. This is a wonderful resource written by a British man named John Ato. He's a great researcher. He's written several other dictionaries, some of them about food, but this one is about word origins. I trust his writing. He's very reliable. Each word explanation is distilled down to one paragraph, one very useful paragraph. So I use this one a lot. Here's the Dictionary of American Slang, which was published in 1960, so it's a little dated, but it's still great fun, great fun to read.
GOAT is not in there.
It's not in there.
No.
Not in there. A Dictionary of Surnames is another favorite of mine. If you have a European-derived surname, chances are it will have been researched in this dictionary. For example, my name's Smith, of course, is in here with a long treatise on all the smiths that existed in medieval Europe. You know, the goldsmiths, the blacksmiths, the whitesmiths, the tinsmiths, and the word smith itself, the name comes from a Germanic term meaning to strike. Smitan means to strike. That's where the word smith comes from. So fascinating. You're welcome to look at this one if you like. Here's the one that we were talking about, drunk, Definitive Drinker's Dictionary. Full of terms, slang terms mostly, American English slang about the state of inebriation.
You've really come full circle.
I have.
Was it crapulent?
Crapulent.
Crapulent.
Yeah. See, we're talking a lot about it, right?
We're going out after this, right?
The Secret Lives of Color, a dictionary of color terminologies, where they come from, the symbolic significance of colors. This is a wonderful, beautifully done book. And speaking of color, I was doing a little research on the word and color green, and so I located this book. It's called Green, The History of a Color, all about, the word green itself, how it has been used symbolically throughout the last couple thousand years in art, in our language, and how it's come to mean something entirely different in the 21st century. The photograph on the front of this book is of a young Jane Fonda. And you really should come up and take a look at it because she's got these emerald jade green eyes, and I'm pretty sure that's her photograph was chosen for this cover for that reason. The books in your own reference section of your library here, this beautiful new library, the Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes. This is one I'd like for my own shelves. The Book of Wood Names.
Curious book.
We were looking through this. There are no illustrations in here. And I can't even really describe what this dictionary is all about, but it says, this work contains over 30,000 wood names with their corresponding commercial, common, botanical, and vernacular names. And
literally just the names, nothing more about them.
Page after page. And Lauren said,
who needs this book?
Who needs this book?
Woodworkers of the world need that book.
Wow, it's astonishing to me. Here's a wonderful one. The 5-Language Visual Dictionary has photographs of objects and their names in English, French, Spanish, Italian, and German. Big, thick one.
Do you speak any other languages apart from English,
Not
Chrysti?
well, not well, but I've studied German a lot. I've taken Latin classes, Greek classes. That's it. That's it. I am monolingual, but alas, to my dismay. Dictionary of the American West. This is a great one for those of you who are interested in rodeo terminologies, cattle raising, horses, everything to do with the American West, ranching, the fur trade. I use this one quite often as well. I have this one at home.
Seems
This
like
one's in your
a
dictionary.
good book to have at your side when you're reading This America of Ours by Nate Sweber.
There you go.
Just plug in the
yeah,
books.
I love the way you do that.
Gotta do
You could
it.
talk about this dictionary. You picked this one.
Oh,
up.
yeah. Knots are fascinating to me. This is the Ashley Book of Knots, and it is an encyclopedia of knots, how to tie them. There's some really wonderful illustrations in here of sailors doing weird knot things. You can look at it to know what that means. But yeah, it's beautiful. It has. Yeah, I feel like every knot. I am not a knot expert. I don't know if every knot is in here, but
Knots
a good
are like
number.
a separate language.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The terminology for knots,
Yeah.
the ability to create all kinds of architecture with knots. It's just astounding to me. So
Yeah.
those last 5 dictionaries are in your library, and there are other ones that are just as fascinating. But we had to put a muzzle on ourselves. We had to stop. But I would suggest that next time you're in the library or a bookstore, go to the reference section and check out the dictionaries. It's a fascinating world.
Yeah, one last go around. Does anyone else have any questions for Chrysti?
Yes.
The term P's and Q's, where does that come?
Oh, yes. Mind your P's and your Q's. I studied that early on. That was an expression of interest to me. Some people think that here again is another inconclusive expression. Nobody knows exactly where it came from. Some people think it comes from the French, and I don't speak French very well. Mind your peds and your Q's, meaning your feet and your pigtails when you're on the dance floor. your P's and your Q's. And then other people think it's a typographer's expression where you can, when you have the little block of the P and the Q for printing purposes, you can mix those up and use one for another. So you have to mind your P's and your Q's because of that stem that comes down. So 2 possible explanations for P's and Q's.
All right.
Anybody else?